Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining in. So these are the tools that we are going to be using today. I've got my pattern master, I've got my pattern paper, I've got my paper scissors, pencil, I've got my tracing wheel, my measuring tape, my sellotape, and I've got my fabric. So today we're going to be using fabric, and make sure you get a fabric that is wide enough for your pattern. So let's get started. So like we always do, we need to first of all draw a vertical line on our pattern paper. So once that is drawn in, what we need to do, we need to place our front bodies on the vertical line. Now the front bodies that we are going to be using for today's tutorial is the shoulder dart bodies. And that bodies, we have previously drafted that, so I am going to leave a link on the screen where you can watch that video if you've not done so. So once you have your front shoulder dart bodies, you need to place a block on the vertical line, making sure the lines are straight and is well placed on the vertical line. Then we go ahead to trace out the front bodies block onto our new pattern paper. So once we are done tracing, the next thing we need to do is to slash open the waist dart line. And we're going to gently slash that through, making sure we don't cut all the way through. Now we have created an opening at the waist dart. What we need to do is to turn the paper over and concentrate on the shoulder dart. Like we did on the waist dart line, we need to repeat that same action on the shoulder dart line, making sure we don't cut all the way through. So once both lines are slashed open, we need to close our waist dart using our sellotape. Now that our waist dart is closed, we need to mark a point for our midriff. So just to explain what a midriff means, a midriff is the area between the chest and the waist. So for my midriff point, I am going to measure 8.5 inches from the neck, and I'm going to mark that down. Once that is marked in, I am going to get my pattern master. I'm going to place my pattern master on that point. So I'm going to draw a curved line from that point to the side seam. So now that we have our new style line, we are going to cut this pattern into two. So for this pattern, we have 2 pattern pieces. But before we do that, we need to mark in our notches. So now that we have located where we need our notches to be on our patterns, it is time for us to cut this pattern open, making it 2 pattern pieces. So now we have both pattern pieces. What we need to do next is to make sure we close our shoulder darts. So in order for us to close our shoulder dart, we need to make sure we open what was previously our waist dart. And by opening the previous waist dart, that will allow us close our shoulder dart smoothly. And once again, we're going to take our sellotape like we did previously to make sure our darts are properly closed and secured. And also I went ahead to number my pattern pieces. So this pattern is pattern number 1 and the lower part is pattern number 2. Once our pattern pieces are numbered, what we need to do next is to trace off our new pattern pieces. So we're going to get ourselves a new pattern paper where we're going to trace off these pattern pieces. And like we always do, in order for us to secure our pattern pieces, we need to make sure we use our sellotape. So once our pattern piece is secured, we need to get our tracing wheel to trace out this new pattern. Once I'm done tracing, I would just get a pencil to draw a curved line around the bust area just to give it a little shape. Then I'll continue tracing that out. So the curved line is just to give me a guide while tracing. And whilst tracing out this part, don't forget to trace out your notches as well. Notches are very important. So once we are done tracing out our pattern, we need to flip the paper over, making sure our tracing wheel is well penetrated through the pattern paper. And once you've checked everything, we need to flip that back to the front and take out our pattern piece away from the pattern paper, like so. So just a little side note, what I normally do after tracing, I just take my pencil, follow through the traced line with my pencil just to make the lines obvious. This is just a personal preference. It's not that it's really compulsory. It's not that you must do it, but this is what I do, and maybe you can try it too. And then I go ahead to take my pattern master, then follow those lines. So once I'm done using my pattern master to draw out all the lines, I will then go ahead to add my seam allowance. So on my pattern master, there is a line before the edge of the pattern master. You need to place that line on your pattern piece line, and that will give you an accurate measurement of 1 centimeter for your seam allowance. So when it comes to seam allowance, you really don't have to use a centimeter, but I prefer to use a centimeter. Most people use an inch for their seam allowance, so it depends on your personal preference. So once that is done, we're going to take the second half of our pattern piece. Then we are going to place that by sticking that on our pattern paper like we did previously. And we're going to trace that out, making sure we trace everything, including the notches. And once that is done, we are going to use our pattern master to draw out all the lines, then add our seam allowance. We're just repeating the same step that we used in the previous pattern piece. We have to bear in mind that we are dealing with our front bodies, and this pattern piece needs to be labeled as place on fold. It is not like the back piece that you have two separate pattern pieces. This is a front piece and it's going to be placed on fold. And this also applies to the first pattern piece that we created. So once that is done, we're just going to go ahead to add seam allowance to this pattern piece, and we'll proceed to our fabric where we're going to cut them out. So now that we have our both pattern pieces cut out, we need to get our fabric. So I'm using a calico fabric for this tutorial, and you want your fabric to be wide enough for your pattern piece when you fold it. So what I'm doing now is to fold my fabric, because our front bodies is placed on fold, so we need to fold it all up and place our pattern pieces carefully on the fabric. So once we have our pattern pieces well placed on our fabric, we need to get our pins to make sure it's secured on the fabric. So as we can see on both of our pattern pieces, there is a difference in the positioning of our notches. So for the top pattern piece, notches are slightly longer than the bottom pattern piece, and that is because the top pattern piece requires a gathering around that notch area. So what we need to do is to measure the bottom notch length. So whatever our measurement is, we need to make sure while gathering the top pattern piece, we need to make sure it's exactly the same length as the notch area on the bottom pattern piece. So once that is noted, then we can go ahead to cut out our pattern pieces. So once we are done cutting out all our pattern pieces, we need to take it to our sewing machine and join the pieces together. And this will be our final look. So once again, I just want to say thank you so much for joining in. I really appreciate your time, and I'll see you on our next video. Bye for now.